Well, I know, we gotta have hearings before we have bills, right? That's your, yeah. I'm gonna call the hearing to order and recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement, although I'm not gonna take it. I'm gonna ask unanimous consent that all opening statements could be submitted for the record. Brownfields is an important issue for me. I know it's important for the ranking member. I know it's important for my colleague from Oregon. I think it's something that we can do. We've just got to get these old sites reclaimed, back into use. I think the testimony today will highlight that this is something everybody wants to do and move expeditiously. And with that, I'm going to yield back my time and yield to the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. And thank you for holding this important hearing on EPA's brownfield programs. I know that this is an issue that Ranking Member Pallone and I are very passionate about, and I believe that based on previous experiences in state and local government, it's an issue that bears much relevance. I'm proud to represent part of the Erie Canal Corridor in New York State, which includes my hometown of Amsterdam. This was a gateway toward Western expansion. Mill towns popped up along the Mohawk River, helping to usher in our nation's industrial revolution and create jobs. Sadly, many of these manufacturers are gone, but the baggage from industrialization, including contaminated land, still remains. While that is the story from my home county, I want to stress that brownfields are not unique to one region or type of community. They can be found in every congressional district, urban or rural. The EPA found that approximately 104 million people live within 3 miles of a brownfield site that received EPA funding, including 35% of all children in the United States under the age of 5. Brownfield cleanup is critical for environmental revitalization and economic redevelopment efforts. And undeniably, EPA's program has been incredibly successful. EPA grant recipients use funding to inventory, assess, and conduct cleanup at sites. The program administers 2 separate types of grants: direct financial assistance for the assessment and cleanup of properties, and financial assistance to states to aid them in carrying out their own cleanup programs. EPA will discuss some of the astonishing statistics on the success of the program since Congress passed the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfields Revitalization Act in 2002. Over 44,000 acres of idle land have been made ready for productive use. Over 106,000 jobs and $23.3 billion have been leveraged. Cleaning up brownfields properties leads to residential property value increases of some 5 to 11.5%. And $1 of the EPA's brownfields funding leverages between $17 and $18 in other public and private funding. EPA's research has shown that redeveloping a brownfield instead of a greenfield has significant environmental benefits in addition to limiting sprawl and cleaning up blighted properties. We are dealing with a program that has produced tremendous results. Revitalizing a brownfield can help a distressed community's economic comeback, and people are beginning to recognize that brownfields represent opportunities. But despite these successes, the program can be improved. Its authorization expired in 2006. There are reforms that can give grant recipients more flexibility. We can encourage more support, capacity building, and technical assistance for both small and disadvantaged communities. We can make it easier for nonprofit stakeholders to get involved, and we can put more emphasis on regional planning to make this program even more effective. We will hear about the need for more funding, but both competitive grants and grants to states is required. More and more qualified applications must be rejected each year because of insufficient funding. We will hear about the need to increase the cap on individual projects. Many remaining sites are increasingly complex and will require more funding to remediate properly. Today's caps of $200,000 for assessment and cleanup grants are just not enough in many cases. But despite these potential improvements, I want to stress that this program has been incredibly successful, and that is according to representatives from all levels of government, from urban and rural communities, and from nonprofits and private sector developers. There's strong consensus on the steps that need to be taken to make this program work even better, and there is bipartisan support, I believe, for the program in Congress. This is a winning recipe to get a reauthorization done, and I hope this is something we can continue to work on this year. For so many distressed communities and neighborhoods, a brownfield stands in the way of an economic comeback. we can help provide even more opportunities with just a few widely supported adjustments to this critical program. I look forward to hearing more about the EPA's Brownfields program and its role in economic redevelopment, planned and sustainable land reuse, and environmental justice. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair looks to the majority side, seeing no one interested in giving an opening statement. I'll turn to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. I'd also like to thank the witnesses for being here, particularly Mayor Chris Baldwidge from my home state of New Jersey, who I believe will be testifying on the second panel. When we passed the original Brownfields bill in the 107th Congress, I was the ranking member of the subcommittee and the lead Democrat on the legislation, which was one of the only pieces of environmental legislation that I can remember President George W. Bush ever signing into law. We worked in a bipartisan manner then with my Republican chairman, the late Paul Gilmore of Ohio, and I'd like to continue this bipartisan effort as we work to improve on the program and ensure that states and local communities have the resources they need to revitalize their communities. And I hope that my colleagues on the committee will join me in working to improve this important program. The Brownfields program has been an incredibly important tool for protecting public health and spurring economic growth in New Jersey and throughout the country. Brownfields properties are a blight on the community. Though these sites do not warrant listing on the national priority list like Superfund sites, these contaminated properties can have negative environmental and economic impacts. The success of this program can't be understated. Removing public health hazards by cleaning up contaminated sites is incredibly important for the surrounding communities. Since the program's inception, thousands of contaminated sites have been remediated, allowing communities to create new developments like housing and parks. EPA has found that cleaning up underutilized or abandoned brownfields properties reduces health risks, decreases pollution, and reduces stormwater runoff. And aside from the environmental benefits, revitalizing these properties can result in crime reduction, job creation, and boosts in the local economy. However, as successful as the Brownfield programs has been, there is still so much important cleanup work to be done. I expect we'll hear from today's witnesses about the staggering number of brownfields properties in need of remediation and the increased complexity of the remaining sites. Many stakeholders have indicated a need for increased funding and flexibility to allow states and local communities to use their resources effectively to address the increased complexity of these cleanups. Through multi-purpose grants, regional planning, and increased caps for individual grants, communities can start to tackle this problem. Communities also need assistance with capacity building. Through job training, technical assistance, and education and outreach, communities can leverage federal and state assistance, engage with developers in the remediation process, and take ownership of their community's revitalization. And we should be equipping communities with the tools they need to ensure successful cleanups. Despite the growing need for resources and broad support on both sides of the aisle, this successful program has never been reauthorized. And while the program has continued to receive appropriations, unfortunately, funding levels have declined. Furthermore, the federal tax incentive has lapsed. These were incredibly useful tools that encourage developers to remediate sites by allowing them to deduct the costs of cleanups. So we can't continue to expect the same success from a program that is underfunded and lacking the necessary tools to be effective. As we work to determine how we can strengthen the program, we should ensure that funding is part of the conversation, and we should all support cleanup efforts and should ensure that these efforts are adequately funded. So I appreciate today's opportunity to learn more about how we can increase the effectiveness of this program. As many of you know, I mentioned, introduced legislation to reauthorize appropriations and create the needed flexibility for the Brownfields program. My legislation aimed to address some of the concerns that have been expressed by stakeholders, including increased capacity building, more flexibility in the use of grants, and increased caps on individual grants. I'd like to reintroduce an updated version of that bill soon, and I hope that we can work together to get bipartisan Brownfields legislation signed into law this year. And I guess I can't help but mention tomorrow's Earth Day, and so I think it's particularly great both Mr. Shimkus, Chairman Shimkus, and Mr. Tonka that we're having the hearing today. I fully intend to talk about brownfields when I go around the district tomorrow and over the weekend at our various Earth Day events. Thank you.
And I thank my colleague, and he yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the Matthew Stanislaus, Assistant Administrator for the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response from the U.S. EPA. He's been here numerous times. We're friends. And welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Shimkus, Ranking Member Tonko, members of the subcommittee. I'm Matty Stanislaus, Assistant Administrator for the Office of Land and Emergency Management. Brownfield sites, as been noted earlier, are the heart of America's urban and rural downtowns and existing and former economic centers. Now, reclaiming these vacant, underutilized properties and repurposing brownfields to the core of EPA's community economic revitalization efforts through the Brownfield program. Repurposing land can be the impetus for community revitalization. Our Brownfields program can help be a catalyst for redevelopment and revitalization and hinges on the success of key local partners working together to implement the vision of local communities. The EPA's Brownfield program provides direct funding to communities, states, tribes, and not-for-profits for brownfields assessment, cleanup, revolving loans, research, and technical assistance. The unmet need for brownfields funding for local communities to address abandoned, underutilized, and contaminated sites continues to rise. The demand for brownfields funding far exceeds brownfields program funding levels and exacerbated by the increased assessment and cleanup costs. EPA currently is only able to fund approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of the competitive grant applications we receive. The program estimates that over the past 5 years, an additional 1,767 requests for viable projects scored highly, but were not selected because of inability, because of lack of funding. If EPA had the funding to select, these grant would have resulted in about 1,800 proposals being funded, which would have resulted in over 50,000 jobs and leveraging about $12 billion in public and private funding. The Brownfields program is premised on partnerships between the public and private sector, with the EPA's critical early resources providing the certainty to leverage funding from other government agencies and private sector to achieve positive economic and environmental and social outcomes. As has been noted earlier, for every dollar EPA invests in communities, it leverages about $18 of private and other public resources. More than 113,000 jobs has been leveraged through EPA's funds, which has leveraged about $22 billion in cleanup and redevelopment projects. EPA's research has shown that redeveloping a brownfield site rather than a greenfield site has significant environmental benefits, including reducing vehicle miles traveled and related emissions from about 32 to 57%, and reducing stormwater runoff by an estimated 47 to 62%. Using census data, EPA found that approximately 104 million people live within 3 miles of a brownfield site that received EPA funding, roughly 33% of the U.S. population. This includes 35% of all children in the U.S. under the age of 5. While there's no single way to characterize communities located near our sites, this population is more minority, low income, linguistically isolated, and less likely to have a high school education than the U.S. population as a whole. As a result, these communities may have fewer resources with which to address concerns about the health and the environment. Preliminary analysis of the data of a subset of communities receiving grants shows that there is a significant tax revenue increase from the redevelopment of brownfield sites. Our data shows that there's an estimated $29 to $73 million in additional tax revenue to local governments in a single year after a cleanup. This is 2 to 6 times more than the $12 million EPA has invested in these communities. I know over the years there's been support for significantly increasing the amount of cleanup grants. Providing this increase, we support a modest increase, but there is a risk of impacting less communities. Based on how much we increase the size of these cleanup grants, we could actually reduce the number of communities that actually receive grants and the leveraging of those monies from the private sector and other public resources by up to 60%. So 60% of communities may potentially not be getting grants on a yearly basis if all we do is increasing the size of the grants. In addition, we want to preserve the local communities' knowledge and information to determine the use that best fits their vision, and not have a predetermination and division of the grant resources based on upfront determination by the federal government regarding resources. We want to preserve the competition process, which looks at those communities that have the best plans in place, that have the best partnerships in place, which has been the basis for the success of EPA's Brownfield program. With that, I will close and take your questions.
Thank you, Administrator, and it's always good to see you. Thank you again for coming. Before we get into other questions, I think I was going to reserve this for the chairman to make his remarks, but perhaps I do want to ask something before we get started, then I'll begin with the ranking member. We've got an example, I know, in West Virginia of the real benefits. You talked about 18 times. We got one up in the northern panhandle of West Virginia, in the Hancock area, that for $2.5 million, they've invested over. Private sector has put $70 million in, so it's almost a 30-to-1 odds up there for that, and that it's really had an impact. So I want to thank you for for working with them on this program. Pat Ford was the contact up there, if that name rings a bell with you or not. But secondly, with back in your testimony, in your written testimony, you talked about about 24 or 25% of the grants went to towns of 20,000 or fewer. I'd be curious to take that down a little bit further and to find out. I think in some areas of rural America, especially mine, most of the communities are less than that, significantly less, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people. When the coal mines are shut down and all the work that was related to those coal mines, they may only have 700 people in a town, and they've got there's no money. There's no money in that community. Can you share with us a little bit about the flexibility you have to earmark it towards rural areas that need help? When the mines shut down, that means the railroad shuts down. And when the railroad shuts down, we know invariably there are going to be some brownfield sites associated with where the rail siding had been. They can't afford to do it. So can you help a little bit about explain maybe really rural areas of 2,000 people or fewer? Do you have any sense of what that might be percentage-wise?
Sure. I would answer it in a couple of parts. One, I think particularly smaller communities, rural communities, have asked us, and we've that upfront technical assistance is really key. The capacity for these rural communities to be able to compete is really critical. So we provide a lot of upfront assistance. We have a national network of technical assistance providers. In fact, in West Virginia, there's a center to provide assistance to local communities, I think one of the most successful ones in the country. So the upfront technical assistance is really critical to develop that capacity, identify opportunities. We also have a non-competitive mechanism where a local community wants to do an assessment on an individual site. And what a lot of local communities, smaller communities have said is they don't really want to administer a grant because there's a lot of administrative burdens associated with the grant. So they'd rather, if they have an individual site, they'd rather assess that site. So we have a contract-based mechanism to assess a particular site. So we think that is successful as well. In terms of the grant process itself, one of the things we've done is we've separated out new and existing grantees. So that and that has resulted in increasing the number of smaller communities and rural communities receiving grants. So those are a number of things that we have put in place.
Okay, well, again, just trying to put it in context with it. We often talk about the Speaker's home in Janesville, Wisconsin, being a small town. It's 3 times the size of my hometown, and I live in the largest city in my district. So I think we have to understand there are a lot of small towns, and so let me follow up. Would it be advantageous for some of these small towns to collectively put together a regional approach towards it and get funded? Would that help?
Well, and
We've been
we
told
have,
that they couldn't do that, and I don't know you and I haven't talked about that, but I wanted to, given this chance this morning to talk about that, would a regional approach be helpful for small towns to get together so that they maybe collectively come up to 3,000 or 4,000 people?
oh, absolutely. And we have two, and we could do maybe better outreach regarding that. We have something called a community-wide assessment grant. So one or more communities can say, we want to have a single grant to be administered over a broad geography, so we can look at that. We also have an area-wide planning program, which is intended to look at not just the sites itself and not just the contaminants itself, but look broadly at, what will it take to redevelop an area? Enable market studies, enable local visioning, enable infrastructure studies. In fact, in our next round, we're going to do a particular focus on communities that have closed coal mines and closed power plants.
Okay, thank you. And now let me recognize the Congressman Tonko from New York. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Administrator Stanislaus, thank you for your testimony. As I indicated in my opening statement, this is a great program. And I would like it to have the additional resources and statutory changes necessary to make it even greater. I believe that folding Brownfields cleanup into broader regional economic development efforts can help local, county, and regional authorities to make smart and sustainable planning decisions. In my district, for example, we are trying to determine which parts of a waterfront will be developed and which will be left green in a long stretch of miles along an intercoastal waterway system. Brownfield cleanup priorities should be considered in this effort. New York State's Brownfield Opportunity Areas, the BOA program, takes a neighborhood or area-wide approach rather than the traditional site-by-site approach to the assessment and redevelopment of brownfields. This allows for more comprehensive planning and certainly a stronger sense of cleanup. I believe this is similar to EPA's area-wide planning grants. So I would ask you to give us a quick history of this type of grant. How has it changed since its inception, and what is the thinking at EPA?
Well, I mean, I actually brought the area-wide planning approach to the EPA from my work in New York on developing the Brownfield Opportunity Area Program. And we think it's really critical and has been really successful, particularly with communities with economic distress, to look at more broadly, the planning side, the market study side, the infrastructure study side. And just to give you a bit of kind of the leveraging, the recipients of area-wide planning grants to date have reported that the $12 million in grants have leveraged about $354 million of other public and private resources. And one of the things that we really emphasize is use these grants to identify implementing resources. So let's just not have a plan for plan's sake. Let's figure out, of our plan, what kind of federal, state, and local resources are there to implement the vision coming out of a local community.
If I might ask, do you see economies, have you witnessed or somehow interpreted economies of scale by doing perhaps testing and some of the drilling they need to do in these areas to determine the response? Has that produced any sort of economies of scale by doing it in a regional capacity rather than community by community doing their individual thing?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we have seen from the first set of grants in the federal government is that it's important to develop a boundary that makes sense. And it could be a geographic boundary, it could be a multi-political jurisdictional boundary. But what works is making sure that there is a real working governance structure and a real working geography. We have found early on that if the geography is too big, that it actually impedes success.
Okay.
You really need to, so what we ask folks to identify a few catalyzing sites, identify a geography that's manageable, show success there before you go broader.
What would be too large? You have any, could you share what is too large? Is it beyond certain mile measurement?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is it a certain mile measurement along from distance from each other, or what is too large?
Well, I think, frankly, it's going to depend on the part of the country. So what we found is, we have large industrial corridors and multiple municipalities who work together historically. That's a natural fit. But if you have communities that are dispersed by miles, it's very hard for that to work. So it really depends a little bit of history, a little bit of working relationships on the ground.
Okay, and in terms of nonprofits, they can be important partners for local governments and developers to get projects completed, especially for our many disadvantaged communities. Are nonprofits currently able to receive grants for a cleanup?
Well, no, and clearly, what we've heard from various not-for-profits who really serve as an extension of local government.
What about the ability to receive grants for assessments?
I'm sorry, they're not eligible to get assessment grants.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any concerns as to why nonprofits with a good track record for cleanup grants should not be qualified?
It's a statutory issue.
What is your sense? Do you think that we should amend the statute?
I do. I'm clearly focusing on those not-for-profits that play a role in redevelopment and have the local partnerships to enable the project moving forward.
And are there additional tools that EPA has for capacity building for disadvantaged communities?
Additional tools, well, I think I described a little bit, the technical assistance program is really critical, funding local entities to provide direct technical assistance to municipalities. So those are things that we've been doing upfront outreach. So those are things that we've been doing.
Well, I would just state, and I see my time is up, but I would state that a comeback scenario for many of our disadvantaged communities that has a brownfield cleanup situation needs additional focus, and the assistance that we can provide for that would be important. I have many other questions that I will enter into the record so that EPA can respond to those concerns.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now, for the next round of question, coming from Dr. Bouchon from Indiana, 5 minutes, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this will springboard off Congressman Tonko's questioning. We know that many of the brownfield sites already cleaned up and redeveloped are less complicated sites. For sites that are more contaminated and thus more complicated than others, what can be done to encourage cleanup and redevelopment of these sites?
Well, I'm a big believer, and we've done studies, and independent studies. From a financial transaction perspective, the site assessment resources are really critical to better manage the risk of a site. In terms of how do you translate this unknown to a known, how do you translate the contaminants to what does it take to clean up? So then that could be underwritten in terms of the subsequent financing.
Okay, are some of the sites federally owned, anything federally owned, or is I don't know, do the feds clean these up themselves? For example, I have an old nerve gas plant in the northern part of my district, facility that was a DOD, and it took years and years and years to get that repurposed into, now it's, an economic development area and kind of like is this program involved in any of that stuff, or that's totally separate from?
Yeah, I mean, that's largely separate. There's a separate track of figuring out how DOD properties or DOE properties can be transferred and making sure that the federal government addresses its liability either before transfer or subsequent to transfer.
Yeah, once the property is transferred, I guess no one in the private sector would take a transferred property in that kind of condition. So, but once that type of property then would be in the brownfield program. I'm just trying to clarify from
No, not so. Typically, in a DOD kind of property, it's typically transferred to a local government.
Yeah, which this was.
Yeah, and then either some cleanup is done or some parceling of that property to redevelop some parcels and not others.
Yeah.
And then there are ways of limiting liability through instruments with the state and through some insurance products.
Okay. Are there other federal agency barriers to getting some of these sites redeveloped? For example, Fish and Wildlife. I mean, I can just name other agencies. Are those barriers? And I know most of these are industrial buildings that are old factories, but I mean, are there other federal agencies that have to be interacted with that are barriers to getting some of these sites cleaned up that you're aware of?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily barriers. I mean, we do in fact engage with other agencies on the economic development resources side. like DOT and HUD. So we want to make sure that once the assessment is done, once a cleanup plan is developed, that the implementing resources, like Tiger grants from DOT, for example,
Yeah.
you know, that there is some advantage for communities who've done the hard work. And similarly with HUD, we've been working with HUD as well.
Okay, how many applications do you get per year approximately?
Oh, can I get back to you?
I know that's, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I have it here, but I'll get back to you.
Okay, and approximately, well, you won't be able to answer this neither. I was going to say approximately how many grants do you award every year?
Well, I'll give you a percentage, you know, so
Yeah.
we are only able to fund about 25% to 30%
Okay.
of the recipient, of the grants we receive, grant applications.
And so, can you just, I mean, it's complicated, right? But how does the EPA, how do you analyze an application to determine whether a project's going to be successful? Is there like some immediate things that flag goes up, red flag goes up, this, you might as well not even try to get a grant from us? I mean, there's probably entry-level type decision-making, you know, and then I was a doctor, so triaging of possible sites that might qualify.
So are you asking how we evaluate the
Yeah.
grant application? So we publicly announce the grant criteria up front.
Right.
You know, and it looks like the local circumstance, the capacity of the recipient, of the grant applicants, and we do a national competition and we score that, and that's how we do that.
Oh, that seems pretty straightforward. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The prerogative of the chair, I have one follow-up with one more question to you, if I could, before I turn over the ranking member. The Brownfield law requires that 25% of the funds appropriated to EPA for brownfield sites, they're to be used to characterize, assess, and remediate petroleum brownfields. Do you think this petroleum set-aside is still necessary?
No.
Okay, thank you. Now, I recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the full committee, Mr. Blum from New Jersey.
Thank you,
5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. The Brownfields program, as you said, Mr. Stanislaus, has been a success. Communities have been able to leverage federal and state dollars and clean up and revitalize contaminated sites. However, brownfields cleanups are becoming more complicated, resulting in increased assessment and cleanup costs. So I wanted to issue initially, would an increase in the cap on individual grants be helpful to communities trying to clean up these more complicated sites?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think a modest increase makes sense. I am concerned that without an increase in appropriations, that we will actually have the total number of communities being reduced. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, that's sort of my second question. Because these grants are in high demand and because of insufficient funding, many applications go unfunded. So if we increase the cap with current funding letters, current funding levels, that's going to mean fewer applications being funded, correct?
That's right.
So therefore, a simultaneous increase in overall funding and an increase to cap for individual grants would obviously be the most useful to continued success of the program.
Yeah, and I should note that in the president's budget, he has called for a bump up in brownfield resources.
Okay. Now, stakeholders have also mentioned that greater flexibility in the use of grants would be beneficial. One such example is EPA's multi-purpose pilot grants, which allow recipients to use the funds for a range of brownfield activities. And one of the potential benefits of this grant structure is expediting the time frame between assessment and cleanup. So let me just ask you about that. To date, how many multi-purpose grants have been awarded by the EPA?
Let me get back to you with a number, but our overall experience has been, which we were surprised by, is actually where a grant recipient identified a single site for assessment and cleanup has actually been a bit slower than we anticipated. You know, so we're looking at providing a grant, a multi-purpose grant for multiple sites. Some sites may need assessment, some sites may need cleanup. So, you know, we want to continue to explore various vehicles of multi-purpose grants, but we're not sure that necessarily that one grant for one site for a site assessment and cleanup necessarily saves time. We're still looking at that.
Yeah, because that was my next question, if you had any preliminary data that shows that this type of grant is beneficial to developers and communities. Can you comment on that, or you're still looking into it?
Well, I think in principle it would, but we just, so there are two competing issues. Would providing a grant for assessment and cleanup on a individual site save time from two competitions? And we're finding that our data shows that is not necessarily the case. And we also have this issue of having money that's out there, then we're fairly obligated, if money's out there for too long, to take it back. You know, there's this tension that we have to resolve. You know?
Okay. Before my time is up, I wanted to turn to administrative costs, because currently Brownfields grants funds cannot be used for administrative costs. However, allowing recipients to use a portion of EPA funds to offset some of the administrative burden could help communities, particularly rural and financially disadvantaged communities. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard repeatedly from grant recipients, particularly smaller communities, that it is a burden, and I think that's a sensible approach to figure out a way of not burdening them with the administrative cost.
Okay. Well, I'm encouraged to hear about the success of the program and EPA's commitment to cleaning up these contaminated sites, and, you know, as I said, look forward to working with the EPA to help strengthen the program and ensure that states and local communities receive adequate resources to administer and support these cleanup efforts. I mean, obviously, in my state, you know, both Superfund and Brownfields have been tremendously helpful, and I could point to so many cases in my district where they've, you know, not only cleaned up sites, but revitalized the economy and, you know, created jobs, and the list goes on and on. So, again, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can work on a bill together that would reauthorize this. And I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I recognize the Vice Chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Harper from Mississippi. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Stanislaus, it's good to have you back. You're a regular
be back.
fixture here, so thank you very much for your insight. At a hearing on the Brownfields program held at the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, you explained that the Brownfields program is a good model of leveraging. Can you explain to us what that means and explain why that is the case and how EPA maximizes the leveraging of federal dollars?
Sure. One, from a transactional perspective, being able to reduce risk early through site assessment allows the unknown of total cost to be a known, so that that can be quantified for underwriting and bringing private resources to the table. That's one thing that we do.
Okay.
The second is we've been pushing this idea of preference and priority, which is that if a community has done the hard work, has done the planning, they should get some benefit for example, DOT Tiger grants recognized at upfront planning. So that's some of the things that we've been doing.
Okay, thank you. Will expanding the eligibility for what entities can receive Brownfields funds decrease the number of grants awarded?
Expanding the eligibility, can you expand that?
Well, just basically, if we expand the eligibility for what entities can receive these, what impact, if any, do you think that would have on the overall leveraging of federal dollars?
Well, if I understand your question, so we go through this national competition and we pick the most qualified, and that's a success of the program. If your question is about increasing the size of the grant, is that your question?
Well, or for instance, expanding it to include nonprofits.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
Well,
waterfront grants, those type things.
Yeah, I think not-for-profits, there are benefits, particularly for smaller communities, which really rely on not-for-profits, on economic development and housing development work. So the natural extension provide that capacity gap that some smaller communities may not have. So we think that is a positive. In terms of an upfront determination of, let's say, waterfront grants, we actually think that have an unintended consequence of dividing grants too early in the process, as opposed to having the grant applicants demonstrate who are the best qualified. So,
Well, do Do you think that grants to nonprofits, organizations require more project management resources?
More project management, well, clearly, you know, be it a local government or a potential not-for-profit, they need to demonstrate capability and capacity.
Sure. Okay. There's a bill pending in the Senate right now on brownfields, Senate Bill number 1479. Some of the changes in that bill require EPA to consider certain types of grants, for example, those waterfront grants and clean energy grants. Rather than directing EPA to consider certain sites for brownfields funding, shouldn't local communities decide the best end use for a redevelopment project?
Absolutely. I've gone on record said that before. You know?
Does EPA already have authority to issue a grant to these types of projects?
Absolutely.
Does EPA support the concept of multi-purpose grants? And meaning, are there problems associated with awarding grants funding for both assessment and cleanup activities simultaneously under the same grant?
Yeah, we have a grant cycle right now. I think we were looking at how do we provide even more flexibility. We don't believe we need statutory authority for that, though.
Does EPA support the broadening of grant eligibility so that governmental entities that took title to the property before the date of the Brownfields law in 2002, but which did not cause or contribute to the contamination, are they eligible to receive Brownfields grants funding?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Municipalities have raised that as an impediment to redeveloping their downtowns.
How would EPA ensure that these governmental entities did not cause or contribute to the contamination?
Well, I think in the same way that we do now, we actually do a record search and we require a demonstration of their linkage to the property.
Okay, and would these governmental entities have to demonstrate that they conducted the appropriate due diligence or appropriate inquiry?
That's right.
Okay, with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And now we recognize for 5 minutes the Congresswoman from California, Ms. Capps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman McKinley and Ranking Member Tonko, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Assistant Administrator Stanislaus, for your testimony today. Brownfields program has been an important one for cleaning up contaminated properties, reducing exposure to harmful contaminants, and revitalizing our communities. My district's experience with the Brownfield program goes way back to the awarding of initial pilot redevelopment projects in the beginning. And as you know, I represent a district in California that is comprised of many coastal communities. As you can imagine, keeping these waterfront properties free of contamination is not only a concern for public health and the environment, it's also an economic concern. My first question to you, Mr. Stanislaus, do coastal communities have unique challenges when cleaning up waterfront brownfields property?
Unique challenges. You know, I think waterfront properties, I think, vary depending on the kind of contaminants. I also think that there are some unique opportunities given their waterfront and the transportation access also.
So are there some tools or resources that are available to communities who have these particular and maybe unique challenges in their brownfields?
Yeah, I would say the area-wide planning program is one of those grant programs because waterfronts tend to be pretty large in terms of the opportunities. So area-wide planning allows infrastructure studies and market studies.
Okay. And what kind of public outreach does the EPA engage in to make sure that residents, my constituents, are more informed about brownfields and the availability of remediation process?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Well, are there some public outreach programs that you're engaged in that would ensure that the residents, my constituents, and various people become more informed about what brownfields are and that there is remediation a process available?
Sure. So we provide a grant to entities around the country. It's to do that direct outreach and technical assistance to communities in addition to that we do ourselves. In terms of the cleanup itself, the cleanup is administered by state cleanup programs, and we separately fund states and tribes for that.
Okay. I'm pleased to hear that you're engaged in this because I think some people don't even know that they're sitting on top of a brownfield or they're associated with it that might be eligible for some special benefits. Another issue I'd like to talk about is the sustainable reuse of brownfield sites. I think it's very important communities are able to revitalize these underused or abandoned sites in a sustainable way. So are there some ways, and what are they, that you've promoted sustainable reuse of brownfields, such as green building, stormwater management? How have these sustainable uses benefited communities?
Yeah, I would begin with, I think brownfields by itself is very sustainable because they are in kind of population centers and lower air emissions and lower water kind of impacts. So in terms of promoting some of the items you suggested, we actually highlight some of the best practices used in other sites, like green infrastructure, for example. And there have been a few sites, like in Monroe, Michigan, where there's actually an assembly plan for wind energy, so.
Okay. That's a reuse, isn't it?
Yeah.
I appreciate your testimony here today and answering questions, especially as we deal with the effects of climate change. It's so important that we think about sustainability of development projects, and I'm happy to hear that EPA has been working to promote sustainability in the Brownfields program, while at the same time protecting public health, of course, and revitalizing our communities. And with that, Chairman, I'm prepared to yield back, or yield to someone else.
Thank you. Not seeing any more on the this side, the enlightened side of the argument, so we'll move to the other side again, and the hopeful side, and go to
the idealistic
for
side.
5 minutes. Mr. McNerney from California.
Well, I appreciate the hearing. Mr. Stanislaus, would it be fair to say that every single congressional district in this country has real estate that would qualify for the Brownfield program?
I can't imagine that's not the case.
That's right. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think we have a good case that we could make to our colleagues to get this program funded. Moving on. I'm really interested in your leverage statements. You said you can leverage sometimes 1 to 18. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, I think it's frankly the sweet spot of government. So I think that it provides the upfront money to deal with the uncertainties, and when you deal with the uncertainties, more private capital and more even public economic development resources can be brought to the table.
Well, you also mentioned you want to preserve the competitive process, but there's probably a lot of potential projects that don't have the resources to put together a quality proposal. Are there means within the program to help some of these communities?
Yes. So we fund, because we cannot directly assist communities to write a grant application that we're going to have to judge. So we fund entities around the country to provide assistance to actually help in preparing those applications.
Very good.
And identifying how they should best put together a competitive application.
Or is that a successful operation?
Oh, it's very successful. I can give you the list and what each of these recipients have been doing.
Very good. The city of Stockton, California is in my district, and it's benefited from the Brownfields program significantly. Seed money eventually led to revitalization, the seed money that you talk about, of properties along the Stockton Deepwater Channel. I understand also that the EPA has a relatively new Repowering America's Land initiative, which focuses on renewable energy, and it looks like there's about 150 programs that have gone through that. What is the advantage for a renewable energy business to use that?
Well, it makes all the sense in the world where you have a contaminated property, particularly a contaminated property where other kinds of redevelopment are more challenging. What we've done is we partnered with the Department of Energy, Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we've mapped contaminated sites around the country for wind energy opportunity and photovoltaic energy opportunity. And also these happen to be in proximity to transmission line corridors as well. We see it's a great fit between renewable energy and a use of a property that may not otherwise be usable for other kinds of uses.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
Thank you very much. And now we'll, staying on that side of the aisle, we'll go down for the next 5 minutes and questioning from Mr. Green from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and our witness for being here today. I represent an area in Houston, Harris County, Texas, and we have a number of former industrial sites. It's a very urban area that grants through Brownfield programs have been instrumental in transforming some of those underutilized and abandoned sites into productive properties in the community. However, many small and disadvantaged communities don't have the capacity to undertake these revitalization projects like a city like Houston could do. Mr. Stanislaus, in your testimony, you mentioned that EPA data shows that funding and technical assistance are reaching small and disadvantaged communities. How much of this assistance is reaching the disadvantaged community, and do you have any examples of locations where EPA has worked with those smaller disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, I could follow up with specific examples, after this hearing. But I think we have done a pretty good job of trying to make sure that all communities participate in the grant program. But in addition to the grant program, what many mayors or town managers of smaller communities say is, in some cases, providing the ability to move that one property. And so we have contract assistance to assess that one property, and that's been pretty successful. We also have a technical assistance program that I think these communities have found really valuable.
Okay. What type of assistance, could you describe some of the assistance provided by EPA under the Brownfields program?
So some of the technical assistance, it includes, in some cases, actually doing a site assessment, understanding the potential contaminants at a site. In other cases, through the TAB program, we fund grant recipients to help communities understand the requirements of our grant program, understand Brownfields 101, understand transactions, and how to actually go from a vacant, underutilized property and walk them through each step of the transaction and redevelopment.
Well, I have a great example in my community. Again, it's a very urban area. We had a location for our city bus barn back for the last 50 years, up until about 20 years ago. And the lead contamination in that soil was so bad, but it was remediated. In fact, it was left open, a very urban area with a great deal of green space in there that nobody could go on. But after a period of time now, it's actually a community college, covered up the soil, and it's a very viable in a very urban area, so I appreciate that. The area-wide grant program, the AWP, I understand AWP grants have been successful in providing funds to support communities with developing plans and identifying implementation strategies for the area-wide revitalization. How has this program been successful in revitalizing economically distressed communities?
Yeah, what it does, particularly for economically distressed communities, what allows communities is what I call go beyond the fence line. Look at the state of infrastructure, look at the infrastructure investment needs, look at the current market and future market conditions, look at implementing resources that are available at the federal, state, and local government. And again, to recite the stat I gave out earlier, about $12 million to EPA recipients, area-wide plan recipients, is leveraged $354 million in other resources for redevelopment.
Okay. And how do partnerships with nonprofits and other organizations help ensure successful remediation? In my case, it's mostly with our local governments.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think it's critical, particularly in smaller communities that need that capacity assistance. Those not-for-profits could be the local economic development entity, it could be the local housing development entity, or local industrial development entity, which are not-for-profits, to enable the whole process to move forward.
Okay. There are concerns that some sites are cleaned up and new developments may no longer take into account the needs of longtime residents of the area, particularly affordable housing with economically distressed communities. I think an important consideration for revitalization should how these projects serve community. In what ways does EPA work to encourage community engagement to ensure that the needs of these residents are met?
Sure. At its heart, the area-wide planning program is designed to enable community visioning and inclusion of local residents who've been fighting for many times years around that particular site. We've also invested a lot in kind of the tools for equitable development. How do we make sure that, for example, affordable housing, and generally the needs of be it job creation or housing is part of the visioning of a brownfield redevelopment scenario.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Now, They've called the votes. Let's, thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Stanislaus. I appreciate it very much.
Telling me to leave, is that what you're saying?
You're more than welcome, but you will be back.
Okay.
You were a fixture around here. And it wasn't it nice, no one had to yell at you today. So let's, the second panel, and then we're gonna break for votes and then come back after that. So if I could have the five panelists for the second panel, if they would take their seat, please. In respect for the time, because the clock is ticking over there on the call, we got 10 minutes left to go. We have Meade Anderson with Brownfields Program Manager with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, but she's testifying on behalf of the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials. We have Christian Bolwich, who is the mayor of the city of Elizabeth, New Jersey. Clark Henry is the owner of C3 Associates, okay, LLC. Amy Romig, partner in Plew, Shadley, Rocker, and Braun.
Please, Shadley, right here in Braun.
Something. And Veronica Eady, a vice president and director of the Conservation Law Foundation. If it's all right with you, if we just get it started and
Just go for,
I'm sorry?
go vote.
We're going to have to vote, and then we'll come back, okay? You can hold tight. Thank you very much.
We can wander. That's right. Hey, Mr. Chairman, Chris Bolwich. Yeah, I met you last time. Good to see you again.
So, relax, we just impaneled you, so when we come back, we just go right through. Oh, you got lots of time. You're gonna have. So let's see. Test. Oh. I'm going to call the hearing to order. Again, thank you for your patience. Fly-out day, this subcommittee. We have to get the rooms. Come on in, Mayor. It's fine. We want to get the rooms when we get them because of these important issues. So patience, we'll have members coming and going, but it's also the last vote was on the floor, so a lot of them are getting back to their district. So your testimony is still important, and we appreciate you being here. So I'll just introduce folks, unless, Mr. Trader, you want to say anything since you weren't here for opening statements? You want to?
No, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for not being here earlier and had a chance to converse with some of our participants. Really appreciate what they're doing. It's a timely issue and big issue in my state where we have a Superfund site that we're trying to get to resolution on. So this great hearing, sir.
And I look forward to visiting that site sometime soon. So, yep. So with that, I'll just do the introduction. Each person individually, you'll do your 5-minute opening statement. Your full record is submitted for the record. And then we'll go to questions afterwards based upon the testimony. So I'd like to first start with Mr. Meade Anderson, Brownfields Program Manager, Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, on behalf of the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials. Sir, welcome, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you for the break. Good morning, Chairman Shimkus and Ranking.
Let's pull that microphone as close as you
sir.
can. That's the only problem.
All
I can
right.
read. It's kind of hard, but it'll be helpful.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Shimkus and Ranking Member Tonko, members of the subcommittee. My name is Meade Anderson. I am chair of the Brownfields Focus Group with the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials, ASWAMO. I'm here today to testify on behalf of ASWAMO. ASWAMO is an association representing waste management and remediation programs of 50 states, 5 territories, the District of Columbia. Our membership includes state program experts with individual responsibility for the regulation or management of waste, hazardous substances, including remediation, tanks, materials management, and environmental sustainability programs. I'd like to preface my remarks with commenting that our organization does enjoy a positive working relationship with the U.S. EPA. Our collaborative efforts and problem-solving approaches to brownfields issues with the EPA Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization should not be underestimated. I think what you're going to hear from me today is almost an echo of everything that we've heard earlier, and maybe a little bit more. ASWAMO is a strong supporter of the Brownfields program. For the past 14 years, this program has contributed greatly to the economic development and revitalization of the country. State and territorial programs provide significant support to the localities, such as small and rural communities that apply for grants. These programs also help ensure the funding is leveraged to the maximum extent possible to assist in the revitalization of these sites. The vast majority of these cleanups are managed under the state voluntary cleanup programs, which are typically supplemented by the 128A Brownfields funds that we're going to be talking about today. Some of the benefits include providing funds for complete environmental assessments of properties, supporting local community officials in the preparation of grant applications that you've heard earlier, providing workshops for the organizations that are in these districts, and meeting with community officials, just like a couple of weeks ago I was meeting with a town that has 5 employees. They don't have the ability to have a brownfields expert on staff. And supporting the voluntary cleanup programs that I've mentioned that provide the foundation for setting the remediation goals and the institutional controls to make sure the properties are safe for reuse. Since the Brownfields law's beginning, 128A fundings have been provided to the states and states, territories, and tribes with the national funding level at just under $50 million for the last 14 years, whereas the number of applicants has continued to more than double. In 2003, 80 states, territories, and tribes received the funding of $49.4 million. By 2016, 164 entities requested funding, including 50 states, 4 territories, the District of Columbia, 109 tribes, 8 of which were new applicants. The awards in 2003 averaged $618,000. However, by FY16, the average award had dropped to approximately $293,000, less than half what had been awarded when the program started. As you've heard today, we are now facing more challenging sites than ever. Over the last 10 years, we were able to clean up many of the more easily to clean up sites and revitalize them, bringing benefits to the states and the communities. However, what remains is more challenging and the redevelopment has been hampered by the complex issues of the contamination and the challenges of the community as a whole. These properties are financially upside down due to the suspected environmental contamination, yet many of these sites are situated in key locations in our small communities, cities, and towns. The more challenging sites require a unique collaborative approach of the stakeholders working in partnership with the community, local, state, federal governmental organization, business partners, NGOs, and individuals from the community itself. The state's Brownfields programs plays a significant role in ensuring these sites are cleaned up to standards that are safe for the reuse. Earlier we talked about the leveraging that goes on, and the University of Delaware has published two well-respected studies. The economic impact of Delaware's economy, the Brownfields program is one of them, that you get this $17.50 return on a dollar's investment that goes into these brownfield sites. These two documents are referenced in my written testimony. To summarize, SWAMO believes in a robust brownfields program at all levels of government, working in concert with the private sector is essential for the nation's environmental, economic, and social health. And without adequate funding for the state, territorial, and tribal brownfield and voluntary cleanup programs, brownfield goals cannot be achieved. While the current level of funding is inadequate, we want to ensure that is at least protected to a minimum. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to the ranking member of the full committee. You want to introduce the next person to testify, or you recognize the ranking member?
Mayor Bolwidge is the mayor of Elizabeth, which is one of the largest cities in New Jersey, and I've known him for a long time, and he's been mayor for many years, and he's been definitely a progressive mayor who's really done a lot to revitalize Elizabeth. If you go to Elizabeth today compared to 20 years ago, you just see all the changes that have occurred that are all positive. The major downtown area, a lot of people shopping in town. So many improvements. And a lot of that, some of that has related to the Brownfields program as well. So that's why he's here today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Ranking Member Tomko, thank you. And Congressman Pallone, thank you for those very kind words. And always look forward to working with you on the issues that benefit New Jersey. Yeah, as you said, my name's Chris Bolwidge. I'm the mayor in the city of Elizabeth. I've also been the chair of the Conference of Mayors Brownfields Task Force for some 20-plus years. And since the 1990s, the U.S. Conference has made the redevelopment of brownfield properties a top priority. And all of you can understand why that's happened. There's an estimated 1.5 million brownfields, and businesses were unwilling to touch these properties out of fear of liability. The congressman asked the question of the first panelist, is there a brownfield in every congressional district? And the U.S. Conference of Mayors did a study years ago that shows that every congressional district in this country has at least one brownfield incorporated. I testified before Congress numerous times during the 1990s and the importance of this legislation. Urban sprawl has left almost every community with an abandoned site in the nation. The Brownfields law has had a very positive impact on our economy. EPA estimates over 24,000 brownfield assessments, 1,200 cleanups have been completed, 113,000 jobs created, $22 billion leveraged. In our last survey, 150 cities developed nearly 2,100 sites comprising 18,000 acres, and 106 cities reported 187,000 jobs were created, 71,000 pre-development, and 116,000 permanent jobs. Briefly, in our city, Congressman Pallone referred to it, we have Jersey Gardens Mall. It was built on a former landfill, 166 acres, now has 2 million square feet of shopping, over 200 stores, 6 hotels, movie theater, with 1,700 construction jobs, 4,000 permanent jobs, $2.5 million in tax revenue in the first 8 months. Would not have been done without a Brownfields assessment grant. Jersey Gardens Mall is now called a Simon Mall. It recently announced it's going to add 411,000 square feet with an expansion completed in 2017. We have a Workforce Innovation Center providing job placement, soft skills training, and ESL education to residents. It also features a 4.8 megawatt super sun power rooftop solar system, which began producing power in February of 2012 and it can now produce power for 564 homes equivalent. The Brownfields law and program has a proven track record of leveraging private sector investment and creating jobs. Unfortunately, EPA has had to turn away a lot of highly qualified applicants, as evident by the questioning and the testimony of the first panel. The challenge that our communities face now is that many of the easy brownfield sites have been developed, and what now remains are the more difficult brownfield sites, the ones that we like to call medium to dark brown brownfield sites. The Conference of Mayors believe that some minor changes, some of the recommendations that we include for the new brownfields law, fully funding the brownfields program, allowing reasonable administrative costs, clarifying eligibility of publicly owned sites acquired before 2002, removing barriers for mothballed sites, encouraging brownfield cleanups by Good Samaritans. Other recommendations include creating a multi-purpose grant to make the program more flexible and market-friendly. The way the program works now is if a city applies for various grants, identifies the properties where the money will be spent. The problem, naturally, with that scenario is the flexibility enough for real marketplace situations. The city may have multiple developers and businesses who are interested in several brownfield properties. What cities could use is a multi-purpose grant to allow them to assess multiple properties and do cleanup on the properties chosen for redevelopment. If a city has to apply for a grant, wait 6 months to a year to see if they get funding, it naturally hinders our opportunities. Increasing cleanup grant amounts would also be beneficial. I know we differ from the EPA on this, but in the conference's opinion, many of the easy brownfields are already being done. What is tougher are the brownfields that are more complicated due to a variety of factors, including the level of cleanup needed. And for some of the cleanup grants, we would like an increase in the amount to be $1 million, in special circumstances, $2 million. I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify. Brownfields development is a win-win for everyone involved, and the reauthorization of this law could be a top priority of this Congress. I thank you for the opportunity, and I'm available for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor, and it's great to have you. I would now like to turn to Mr. Clark Henry, owner of C3 Associates. Again, full testimony is already in the record. You have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Shimkus and Ranking Member Tonka, for having me here. It's an honor to speak to you as well with the people to my left and right. It's an honor to share this table. I've been working on brownfield redevelopment for the past 15-plus years, both as a public servant working for the city of Portland, Oregon, managing the brownfield program, as well as a consultant working with municipalities, very small, from the village of Sutherland, Nebraska, to the city of Boston, Massachusetts, as well as community-based organizations, developers, and property owners all over the country. I'm intimately aware of working with the Brownfield program and the power that it has. My overwhelming support for this program and the reauthorization is demonstrated in the success that we've had in Portland and across the country. I've administered over $2 million of EPA assessment and brownfield cleanup grants, worked very closely with the job training grantees, as well as revolving loan fund recipients, all of which have leveraged multifamily housing, additional commercial development, light industrial development, and job creation. I lightheartedly refer to the brownfield effect. With the EPA brownfield program involved, as we have brownfield jujitsu. We turn what are liabilities into assets. We kind of reverse the negative effect that they have on our communities environmentally and economically at the same time. The theme here, too, is how these grants help local municipalities and the federal government serve as really strong partners for private sector redevelopment. The Brownfield program has been, in my observations nationally, the best model of how this has been working. I do, as well as previous testimony, have some recommendations how we could further refine some of this. The area-wide planning program that Administrator Stanislaus brought to the EPA from New York and is administering in EPA now, I believe should be made a permanent part of the Brownfield program. It's really a response to how we put properties and entire districts and corridors in the pipeline for development. It never shocks me when you start planning for a brownfield property that no one's been interested in for decades. You start planning for it and everybody wants it. So perception here on both sides is really important. The nonprofit eligibility, too, for me, I think is a very important addition. They are not only more than capable of administering these grants, they are really essential private sector partners, particularly in the creation of workforce housing. I do believe that allowing some small portion of administrative costs is a very positive change under the grants. Though I do believe that local municipalities should bear the burden of operating programs, but when we allow some administrative costs, we go from administering a grant to running a program. And in my experience with the City of Portland and having the time to broker relationships between developers and property owners and advocate for and help projects get through a regulatory process at the state level, the outcomes are very compelling, and you speed things up and you make things happen that otherwise wouldn't. I'm a strong proponent for renewable energy on these facilities, not necessarily allocating specific resources for that, but I really do believe that they provide substantial benefit. I think we do need to clarify the liability for public municipalities, not just making them available or eligible for ownership after 2002, but under circular liability, involuntary acquisitions such as through tax foreclosure, they are protected under statute, but for voluntary they are not, and I believe that widening that would really help municipalities take on projects that they're hesitant to now. The multi-purpose grants allowing us to move from assessment to cleanup. From my perspective, I was dying for these things at the City of Portland, and it would have sped some things up. Though it might not be universally applicable, I really do think it should be an option. And I would love to see the federal tax incentive brought back. That expired in 2011. And then the last little change isn't necessarily a change to the administration or the grant program itself, but it's considering what happens after community planning processes or assessments and cleanups are done, and exploring partnerships with these new organizations and community-based organizations is really essential here. And then there are some new tools because of the Jobs Act and the SEC rules allowing crowdsourcing and crowdfunding on an equity base. Has some really strong potential to actually leverage financing for projects otherwise is inaccessible. And I conclude by really encouraging the reauthorization, and I really want to say that this is working for environment, society, and economy together to make bring our municipalities stronger as well as a stronger United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thanks for the recommendations. That's kind of what we're looking for, too, in all this process. So now I'd like to turn to Amy Romig, partner at Pluge, Shadley, Racher, and Braun.
Perfect.
And you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today so that I can share my views on the EPA's Brownfield program.
Again, pull that mic just a little bit closer. It'll help.
Sure. Better?
Maybe turn it on, too. There's a button in the middle.
There we go.
There we go. A little bit closer. It won't bite you. Just pull it close. No, just pull the whole thing. There we go.
Okay.
There we go. Thank you.
So based upon the committee questions for the first panelist, Mr. Stanislaus, I'm very pleased to see that all of the committee members obviously support the Brownfield program because this program is essential and vital to the redevelopment of our economies in our small towns and cities. As Chairman Shimkus said, I'm an attorney with the law firm of Pluge, Shadley, Racher, and Braun in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I represent private businesses, not-for-profit entities, and other private shareholders who develop these types of brownfield properties. We've also represented various cities and towns within Indiana who have taken advantage of the Brownfield program, and we also represent economic development associations that would love to be able to take advantage of the Brownfields program. The Brownfields program is important to private shareholders because it allows knowledge to be found about these sites that prohibits their development at this current point in time. I'll be quite frank, when it comes to investors, they want to make money, and they're looking at buying properties that they can develop that will be profitable. And quite frankly, they shy away from those properties that have unknown risks. They have to be able to make the calculation, can I make money on this? And if you have unknown environmental liability, they simply won't make that investment. So by giving this money to the cities and towns You're increasing the knowledge base that helps overcome the burden of developing these properties. It makes it much more likely that investors will take these risks and invest their money. We heard a lot from Mr. Stanislaus about the leveraging that happens, and this is precisely what happens when you put this money in the investment of knowledge, is that you make private people willing to invest even more of their money in these projects. I'd like to give an example of one of the projects that my firm worked on. There was a blighted piece of property, several acres, along an interstate in Indianapolis, and the neighboring properties were getting run down. No one wanted to be around this property, and the state of Indiana and the city of Indianapolis invested a couple of $100,000 in helping clean it up so that an out-of-state business would come and invest in a truck stop. Over the last several years, more than $8 million has been reinvested in property taxes, now that they're being paid on this property, in sales tax because people are coming to this property, and quite frankly, the value of the surrounding properties has increased and more development is occurring in this area simply because the state and the city invested a little bit of money. That's a 20-fold increase in the profitability of the seed money that the Brownfields program put into this site. And more sites like this can happen if you increase the flexibility and the money available to these communities. We've heard a lot about how can you improve the Brownfield program, and quite frankly, we do a really great job in Indianapolis. But the smaller towns don't do as well because they do not have the sophistication or the knowledge. While Indianapolis can afford to have a Brownfields coordinator, the smaller towns can't. The person who's handling these things is often an engineer who's worried about how do I get the trash picked up and how do I keep the roads going. So by allowing some administrative costs, you're opening up the program to these smaller communities who need the most help. This will allow these communities to have more information about their sites because knowledge is power, as I talked about before, and it will help them make the contacts and meet the developers that will bring money to their communities. One of the other issues that's really problematic and hindering brownfield development is transactional costs in time of both money and in time, because time is money. If I'm a developer and I can go develop a greenfield site and get a return on my investment in 6 months, that's much more attractive to me than working through the Brownfield program, trying to get the state and the various agencies to approve my permits and not getting a return on my investment for several years. And the reason this is happening is, quite frankly, that the agencies don't have the resources. Our Indiana Department of Environmental Management does a great job, and they have a lot of skill and sophistication, but they have limited resources. So by allowing the Brownfield program to use some of the money for administrative costs, you're going to provide and overcome the problems with time, because quite frankly, more people will be allowed to have this knowledge, and it will speed the process up, and it will make it more attractive to developers. With that, I'd like to thank you again for inviting me, and when we're finished with testimony, I'd be pleased to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for coming. I represent Danville, Illinois, and Marshall, Illinois, which is closer to Indianapolis than my own house. So, so I do appreciate it, and unfortunately, well, fortunately, have to fly into Indianapolis sometime to get to the eastern part of my district. So I know the community better than I used to. So now let me turn to Veronica Eady, Vice President and Director of Conservation Law Foundation. We're glad to have you here. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here and speaking to the committee. Conservation Law Foundation, founded in 1966, is a member-supported environmental advocacy organization. We're headquartered in Boston with 5 offices throughout New England. And we protect New England's environment for the benefit of all people. We use law, science, and the market to create solutions that preserve our natural resources, build healthy communities, and sustain a vibrant economy. And while I'm a lawyer, we're fully multidisciplinary. We employ economists, scientists, planners, and investment fund managers. We support, and I'll refer to my organization, Conservation Law Foundation, interchangeably as CLF. CLF supports, without reservation, EPA and its Brownfields programs. Nonprofit organizations have long played a critical role in facilitating the cleanup of brownfield sites. My own organization has convened community planning charrettes, helping residents to articulate their vision for longstanding contaminated sites. We've also provided technical assistance to city and towns, helping them understand their legal options under state and federal brownfields law. And as a founding member of the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance, CLF is working in broad coalition with other stakeholders to secure funding that would replenish Massachusetts Brownfields Redevelopment Fund, which is the, kind of the corollary to the EPA program. Massachusetts has many brownfield sites that have contamination that predates the Industrial Revolution, and I want to take a moment to talk a minute about the city of New Bedford, which is one of my favorite cities in Massachusetts, iconic, and of course the site of Herman Melville's Moby Dick. Last year, CLF undertook a comprehensive investigation into the nature and extent of contamination in New Bedford and what potential exposure there might be for residents. We focused on an environmental justice analysis, which involved studying census and other demographic data to determine whether low-income communities and communities of color bore a disproportionate environmental burden. We spoke with nearly 24 residents, city officials, environmental regulators, and others. And although New Bedford has received state and federal brownfields funding in the past, one city official commented that the biggest environmental justice issue still facing the city continues to be the lack of funding available to identify more unaddressed contaminated sites. New Bedford's pollution dates back to the mid-1700s when the economy shifted from agriculture to whaling and whaling-related industries such as oil processing, soap making, and shipbuilding. These early industries likely emitted into the environment oils, arsenic, mercury, cyanide, biological waste, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and other caustic substances that were disposed directly into the soils and waterways. After that, we had the textile industry. A century later, that was displaced by the electronics industry. So we have layer and layer upon pollution in New Bedford. New Bedford's population is about 9,500. New Bedford's median income is less than 50% of the state average. Some of the poorest residents literally live across the street from sites that have been mothballed because the industrial operations have long decades gone, nowhere to be found, and the city is left holding the bag. In some cases, pollution has migrated into the homes of people. In some cases, in one case in particular, 84 homes had to be relocated. And these homes were on a site where currently, even today, there are 2 public schools on the site. The Department of Public Health had to come in and do an assessment to find out if there was any special, any spikes in cancer rates and things like that resulting from the contamination. And of course, New Bedford is only one of many similarly situated cities and towns in the country. Brownfield redevelopment is for many cities and towns the only form of developable property, particularly in New England because of limited inventories of undeveloped land. And in order to develop these brownfields, they need access to funding. Access to further brownfields funding and technical assistance would be a major step for these communities. New Bedford does have some good news. There have been some brownfield sites, many actually, that have been redeveloped, and there are a couple that are noteworthy. I'll just name one was a supermarket development that went into a former mill site and created 600 jobs. There's a marine commerce terminal project that will facilitate renewable energy, and that's going to create 200 permanent jobs. So in conclusion, I want to once again say how fully CLF supports EPA in these programs. I appreciate you being here, or your invitation to me, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much. Now I'll start with the round of questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. The first question will go to Ms. Romig. In your written testimony, it takes on what is probably a fairly common notion that the Brownfields program creates a windfall to private developers and investors. Would you please explain why that you believe that is not true?
These developers and investors still have to put their own time and money into these projects. They have significant skin in the game. And when they're tackling these sites are more expensive to deal with than if they were dealing with the greenfield. So the Brownfield program provides a little bit of seed money, but it's certainly not making anyone rich. They're not making a tremendous amount of money on it. And in fact, a lot of these projects, they don't make as much as they might possibly make if they were developing a greenfield. So they're still investing a significant amount of time and money of their own. So it's not a windfall.
Yeah, and I appreciate the time is money. How quickly can you develop a site? Also, everyone's talked about risk, right? There's some risk, and I think we in Congress started understanding that a little bit more as far as risk and reward and time and all that other stuff, and this is a perfect example. Let me go to Mr. Anderson. As you know, the Brownfields law requires, and this was asked earlier to Mr. Stanislaus, that 25% of the funds appropriated to EPA for activities authorized under Circular Superfund 104K be used to characterize, assess, and remediate petroleum brownfields. Do you think that this petroleum set-aside is still necessary?
No, sir. It's difficult to, when you get an assessment grant, a city does, and you're trying to go through the property, if you're trying to designate exactly 25%, it really hampers you. If you've got the flexibility of the full amount, and you're going to run into petroleum on almost all these brownfield sites regardless, so I don't think it's necessary any longer, sir.
And I think that concurs with Mr. Stanislaus.
Yes, sir.
Also testified. The mayor, if in your testimony states that the quote-unquote easy brownfield sites have already been developed and what now remains are more difficult, and use the terminology darker brown, which I'm going to start using. I think it's a good terminology. Your testimony notes that minor changes to the Brownfields law would help spur on additional redevelopment projects and economic growth. Can you walk us through some your opinion regarding what type of changes would be helpful?
The most important one would be clarifying some eligibility as well as flexibility on the grant funding. If the money's targeted for assessments or targeted for cleanup, oftentimes a developer comes in and the money could be used in a better way in some other category. And I think giving us flexibility would help us tremendously.
So explain flexibility. Tell
well, I mean,
where are you constrained and what more flexibility you need?
The assessment grant that we've had in the city of Elizabeth was used excellent to develop an identification of 50 some odd brownfield sites. Now that we've identified the brownfield sites and there's still assessment grants out there, it's important to know that we could still apply for assessment grants, but we understand what's in all of those properties. So if we can use assessment money for cleanup costs, or if we can use assessment money for some type of infrastructure that's necessary to get to the brownfield site. When we built the Jersey Gardens Mall, it was on a 166-acre site. The developer came to me and said, I'll remediate this mall, but you need to build a road to get there. And the road to get there cost $10 million. So I built a road in 1996 to get to a dump, and I could see the campaign literature against me that I built a road to a dump and then nothing happened. So the flexibility would be important, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we did have a bridge to nowhere debate here.
That's another state, though.
Washington, too, so Mr. Pallone remembers that. So, and my last question go to Mr. Henry. In your written testimony, discussed the need for area-wide planning. Can you walk us through what that means when you say area-wide, why you believe it is important to make it a permanent feature of the Brownfields program?
Absolutely. In the early days of administering these grants and working through doing assessments and cleanup planning, when you're doing an assessment and trying to plan for a cleanup, the most important thing that the Brownfield community realizes is you have to know what you're planning for. You have to understand what kind of redevelopment you're looking at. And then you also recognize that just by doing one property, you're probably operating in a corridor or a district with multiple properties. And by knocking down this one domino, you are probably catalyzing some additional investment, but you really also have to take into account, and some of these, and it ties also into the other complications, that the easy sites are gone. Some of these other complications are related to adequate infrastructure, other partnerships that could be out there, and what's this community-supported vision. So in an area-wide planning process, we recognize that developers and organizations and that stakeholder group in general was looking for a vision that really indicated that the city is a solid partner and willing to make the investments like building roads and putting in additional infrastructure. Area-wide planning queues up multiple sites and entire districts for that investment and involves the community in helping decide what that vision is.
And that should be also maybe link them up in a development program.
Yes, and so, yeah, it's debate whether the assessment comes first or area-wide planning. It's happened in different ways, but they're very complementary. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. My time's expired. Chair now recognizes the ranking member subcommittee, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, welcome to all of our witnesses. Mr. Henry, what has your experience with area-wide planning been?
My first experience, I supported EPA's Brownfield office in supporting the first round of area-wide planning grantees, helping them transition their plans into more implementation-based documents and strategies. And then I recently concluded a Brownfield area-wide planning project in Redmond, Oregon, and one in Hickory, North Carolina.
And when you get into an area-wide planning, I can imagine there might be some burdens, and there's certainly benefits. Can you identify each of those? Maybe from experience, what some have been?
Of the burdens and benefits?
Yeah.
So with brownfields, there's a really large perception issue. And when you go into public and you say, we're going to identify brownfields, and we're looking at and you show a map, and they have people's properties up there, red flags go up in their head. So one of the burdens you have to do is say, we're not here to pin you and say that you have contamination. First, the definition of a brownfield doesn't say you're contaminated, and it doesn't say you're liable for it. And so you really have to, there's a lot of communication that you have to undertake to make sure they understand you're creating a vision and you're helping them realize their goals as well. The benefit is once you've effectively communicated that strategy to them, they are very solid partners to the municipalities and their neighbors. And there are people who will get in a room and hash out a strategy that previously you didn't want to talk together. And the plan is that these are also implementation strategies at their core. This is about getting investment. So you're creating partnerships and staging projects and particular properties as catalysts and supporting that show a whole spread of things that can happen on these brownfield properties.
In terms of value added, what does area-wide planning as the greatest value added provide?
I think it magnifies the effect of the brownfield program in general. Okay. And we stop talking about individual properties and we start talking about entire communities and neighborhoods.
And in terms of coming together as an area, is it a common contaminant? If there is a contaminant, is it a common use?
Sometimes you're looking, some of these area-wide planning projects are occurring in industrial areas that are trying to modernize and address, and so the environmental issues and infrastructure issues won't be a burden for new industry moving in. Other times these are like commercial corridors with a lot of automobile-related brownfield sites, like small infill gas stations and automotive. But no, you're almost always talking about multiple types of contamination.
Okay, and Ms. Eady, I am grateful certainly for your calls to recognize the role that these cleanups play in promoting environmental justice. Many brownfields are in distressed communities that need additional technical assistance and capacity building to get the projects done. Can you explain the role that nonprofits currently play in remediating our brownfields?
Well, a lot of nonprofits play the role kind of as Mr. Henry described, leading these planning efforts and things of that sort. But we have directly provided technical assistance to cities and towns, whether it is in describing the liability protections or what the appropriate end uses are for the level of contamination in the property. We're working in coalition with a bunch of groups in a mill town in Massachusetts where there are some community development corporations that are involved in other kind of quasi-nonprofit, quasi-public organizations to do broad planning efforts like the type that would be done in area-wide planning.
Do you think that there's a larger role for nonprofits to play in working on the assessment and cleanup efforts?
I think that there is absolutely an expanded role that can be played, and I think that were nonprofits to have access to EPA public brownfields funding, I think that the role would probably expand and evolve. My organization has a lot of close ties, particularly at the community level, And I do believe that if funding were available, we would be able to strike partnerships with some of these communities and play the more scientific role and advisory role.
Thank you. And if I could just have you across the board state what you think the caps ought to look like, and I would offer the caveat that we wouldn't reduce the amount of award winners, but appropriately increase the overall pot. But what do you think we should do with the caps, if you could do that across the board, please, and start with Mr. Anderson?
What did we use earlier? $1 million, I believe, was one of the caps. That's probably a good cap.
Turn the mic on, please. It's for our transcribers. They need to hear that better.
$1 million would probably be a good cap. That's a lot of money to spend. You do have to have quite a bit of prior planning. But when you get these coal gasification sites, like you mentioned in your roundtable, they're very challenging to deal with, and they can cost much, much more.
Thank you. It's good to see you again, by the way. Mayor?
Yeah. Ms. Tonko, in my testimony, I said $1 million, and then also for special circumstances to go to $2 million.
And Mr. Henry?
Yes, I believe with the caveat that the number of recipients wouldn't be decreased. I think $1 million is a reasonable number.
Ms. Roming?
I find $1 million is reasonable as well.
Yeah, I agree, and also with Mr. Henry's proviso.
Just pull that mic over again.
I agree, and also with Mr. Henry's proviso that it doesn't shrink the number of grants.
I hear you. We don't want to do that.
In a perfect world, yeah.
Okay. Well, you sound like you get along, so that's great. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of our full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to first ask Mr. Anderson a question and then go to Mayor Bolwidge. Mr. Anderson, you note in your testimony, I know you touched upon this, but I wanted to ask it directly. You note in your testimony that the average grant award has declined. Do you think an increase in the cap on individual grants would assist communities, particularly as they try to revitalize sites with more complicated cleanups? I know you answered it, but I'd like to ask you that directly.
The caps for the individual communities, or
On individual grants, yeah.
I think it'll help the communities. You know, it's hard to say. Most of the communities are going to go for the maximum amount because of the difficulty in getting to that point. So why would you go for less than whatever the maximum is for a specific grant, such as $200,000? Some of the grants that I did mention are the 128A, which is a subset, and those have decreased as more entities have come to the table, the states, the tribes, and the territories. But I hate to say it, more money does help.
Okay. Now let me go to Mayor Bolwidge. You mentioned your town, Elizabeth, received a grant under the regional pilot program in the 1990s, correct?
Yes.
We heard from Mr. Stanislaus earlier that EPA has started another pilot program, the multipurpose grant program, to give communities more flexibility. Do you think that having that greater flexibility like that afforded to communities with the multipurpose grants would assist them better in cleaning up the contaminated sites?
Yes, I do, Congressman. Also, you know, the City of Elizabeth is currently using two 2011 EPA community-wide assessment grants for hazardous substances and petroleum in our Midtown redevelopment area. So in answer to your question, I believe yes.
I mean, I think that the flexibility is valuable. Then the most important issue, which was mentioned repeatedly today, is the need for adequate funding. Just like you to comment on, you know, higher funding levels for the program and, you know, what it would mean to Elizabeth in redeveloping brownfield properties.
Congressman, higher funding levels could allow for some reasonable administrative costs, which was testimony not only here but also by Mr. Stanislaw. Also, one of the testimonies on this panel was addressing mothballed sites, which are clearly forgotten. I don't know New Bedford as well, but we have them in Elizabeth as well, where they're just totally forgotten and they sit there. Additional funding would help us address mothball sites. And also the clarifying of the eligibility of the publicly owned sites before 2002. Financing would help address that issue as well, Congressman.
All right, thanks a lot. Ms. Edie, do you want to agree or comment on what the mayor said?
I agree with the mayor, and I was just thinking about whether other contexts, additional funding, particularly to the nonprofit sector, would be helpful. And in thinking about New Bedford, one of our partner organizations in New Bedford called the Buzzards Bay Coalition was given a technical assistance grant to work on one of New Bedford's 2 Superfund sites. This was the New Bedford Harbor Superfund site, and with the technical assistance grant that they were able to get, they were able to directly support the local community, so the community understood the process, which of course is very complex, and you know, that they understood the science. And I think that that's a really critical role, and it's really important to bring the community along, and particularly in New Bedford, where because there is so much contamination, there's this really amazing level of distrust. And I imagine that this is not unique to other parts of the country. And so I think that with nonprofits able to access funding, we could play an important role so that communities would be less likely to oppose redevelopment projects.
All right, thanks a lot. You know, I really enjoy hearing how the Brownfields program has helped so many communities. I don't know if I mentioned to my colleagues, I don't actually represent Elizabeth, where Mayor Baldwin is, but just south is Carteret, which is a much smaller town. But if you think about it, Mayor, I mean, same phenomena. I mean, you know, how many sites in Carteret have been cleaned up? And there again is a much smaller community that doesn't, you know, probably even has less resources because of its size. And when we talk about adequate funding, it's so important, not only for Elizabeth, for a lot of the smaller towns, because New Jersey, Mr. Chairman, has, you know, we have a lot of towns. And people think of Newark and, you know, larger cities, but I mean, most of the towns I represent have less than 40,000 people, but yet they have the same situation as Elizabeth. So,
And Carteret's done a remarkable job on the waterfront with the brownfields from the petroleum industry years ago, and they've created it into warehouses. And Mayor Ryman is extremely proud of his efforts in Carteret.
yeah, no, it's true, and we have more brownfield sites than any other state. I guess that's no surprise.
I thought you would have had that all cleaned up by now. All these years you've been here, I thought you would have had that fixed.
We keep trying.
Gentlemen, yields back his time. We want to thank you for coming, and I want to, even though there's just a few of us left, you do have the chairman of the subcommittee, the ranking member of the subcommittee, and the ranking member of the full committee. I think that shows our interest and the importance of this issue. We look forward to working together as we move forward. And with that, I'll adjourn the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, pleasure. Pleasure.